Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. One of the topics of our show is going to be dicamba applications in Xtend soybeans. There are many different regulations as you head across the country state by state, but we're going to talk about some of the more common ones and what you can do to be successful putting on dicamba.
We're also going to talk about success in corn, and that has a lot to do with disease protection and plant health. So we'll talk about fungicide use in corn today.
We've also got a tough to control weed of the week. It's going to be kind of fun because this one gets misidentified a lot. We'll hopefully clear up some of that confusion for you. But first, here's our farm basics.
Out here, great yield starts with great weed control. That's why I choose the Roundup Ready Xtend crop system, the system that makes the difference. Because only I know what it takes out here. Yield's what it's all for. But keeping my fields clean all season, that's what it's all about. This is my field.
If you're a non-farmer, you may occasionally hear a farmer say the words chem fallow. Well, today during our Farm Basics time, we want to talk about exactly what that means, the positives and the negatives.
Well, when you've got some ground that you're not going to be farming for one reason or another, maybe you choose to, hey, I'm going to leave it for a year, catch the rainfall for a year, and then next year I'll have 2 years worth of rainfall to try and grow a crop on. It's actually kind of a common thing, especially when you get into the western part of the United States or into more arid climates. But for some farmers this year, the spring was just too wet. They weren't able to get in the field, and they've kind of got a fallow year whether they wanted to or not. Either way, there are weeds that are coming up, and for farmers to look at those weeds all through the season, see them go to seed, and know they're going to fight a whole bunch more weeds next year, that's just unacceptable.
Okay, well, let's step back for just a second. Fallow just simply means that we're not going to raise a crop. When we say chem fallow, that means that yes, we're not going to raise a crop, but Darren just started talking about weeds. Farmers don't like weeds, as you know. So we want to control those weeds. You have two basic methods to control them. Used to be three methods. The third method, pulling the weeds. Not many people want to do that anymore. So the two methods that are left is number one, tillage, and number two, herbicides, or as some farmers will refer to it, chemical or chem. So that's where the chem comes in, is herbicide weed control, and fallow just means we're not going to farm that ground for the next year.
All right, so let's go back to some old school farming methods of just, well, hey, I don't have chemicals, so all I'm going to do is tillage, and I'm going to till the ground. Guess what happens the first time you catch a rain, or if there's moisture in the soil, maybe a week after you do the tillage? Well, more weeds are coming up. So what's your option at that point? Well, just go back, do some more tillage, and do it again and again. And what we found too often is that for fallow situations, farmers were doing tillage 3 or 4 times even in a lot of cases, and they ended up getting more erosion potential out there because the soil just kind of got powdery and would blow fairly easily.
And every time there's tillage done, then there is moisture that's lost. There's also organic matter that's lost. So all those things are not real good, plus the fact that it costs money every time you have to do tillage, a lot of fuel, and wear and tear on equipment. So a lot of farmers turn to herbicide. And yes, there are many advantages to that, but the disadvantages are, hey, it does cost some money. So not only do I have the application cost, but I have the herbicide cost as well.
All right, Brian, it costs money, but here's the thing. It could actually save farmers money depending on what herbicides they choose. Now, there are certainly herbicides like Roundup, for example, or like Gramoxone that are going to burn down what's up today, but not have any soil activity to kill the weeds that are going to come up tomorrow. There are other herbicides, though, that get used in a chem fallow situation that do have some soil residual, meaning they're going to still stick around in the soil for a little while, maybe a few weeks, and new weeds that are germinating will pick up some of that herbicide and be controlled as well. So you'll get control that day of weeds that are up, but you also get control of weeds that are going to pop up over the next few weeks.
All right, so the reason why we're talking about this today is to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of fallow. So in other words, why would a farmer let that ground sit idle for a year or fallow for a year? Darren mentioned earlier to conserve moisture. So you kind of build up the moisture going into the next year. You might build up a little bit of moisture. It's not a real big deal, but you can gain a little bit. One of the other things is you'll have more nutrients there because every year your soil's organic matter releases some free nutrients. Okay, so if you have 2 years worth of free release, that's obviously much better than 1. So if a farmer wants to cut costs on fertilizer, he would have a little bit more fertility there after a second year. But the whole thing is, the way I look at this deal, if you fallow for a year, a lot of the beneficial microbes in the soil die, including mycorrhiza fungi. So the problem is the next year, if a farmer wants to raise corn, a lot of times that corn will turn purple early in the year. We really worry about that this year when you're going to find out, okay, I wasn't able to plant a crop, I take prevent plant, then going into the next year, now we have purple corn. That's a real problem. So what a lot of farmers will do to avoid that issue is raise a cover crop during the fallow year.
The other big downside here, Brian, is of course farmers aren't going to get any income from that ground for one year, and that's a challenge. You say we're going to gain some fertility, maybe gain a little bit of moisture, but at the cost of losing a whole year's worth of income. So that is a big trade-off.
Which is why fallow isn't real common. But again, today we wanted to discuss chem fallow and what that was exactly. And again, fallow is, at least for this season, not raising a crop, whether that's by choice or not. And then the chem side is herbicide weed control as opposed to using tillage.
Well, we definitely need some good weed control options if we have our Weed of the Week out there. We'll show you how to stop this one coming up later in the show.
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for springfield conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
Ideal for herbicide applications, the Ultra Low Drift's large air-inducted droplets were designed to eliminate driftable fines without sacrificing coverage. Its thick three-dimensional pattern creates multiple angles for the spray to cover the target. Hypro, helping you spray better.
Invisible, invasive, underestimated. Nematodes are stealing over 10% of yields, and current protection methods aren't enough. But a breakthrough seed treatment technology controls nematodes when they attack. Now offering NemaStrike technology. It provides broad spectrum control from the start and stays in the root zone as plants grow. Take back your bushels with NemaStrike technology. Strike where nematodes attack.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
The number one question we've gotten from farmers this year has been, how can I cut costs? So a lot of people will say, well, I don't want to spend the money on a corn fungicide. Today we want to talk about when that should be cut and when it should be used.
Well, let's start talking about the early season use of fungicides in corn. Now, in some parts of the country, this is very popular. In other parts, guys say, I don't have much disease pressure early, I'm going to wait till later. Disease pressure is only one of the things that you may be trying to accomplish by putting a fungicide out early. When you're spraying in that V4 to V7 time window, that's your one shot at covering those leaves. Once we get bigger corn, it's tough to get coverage down towards the bottom of the plant, and there's certainly some diseases like gray leaf spot and northern corn leaf blight that can start very low on the plant.
We're not usually too worried about disease early on in the year, but the main reason why I like spraying that early is, number one, we can spray it ourselves. Number two, you can get by with a low rate because the plants are real small. So typically we're talking $3 to $7 worth of fungicide, and if we're already out there spraying ourselves, boy, you don't have a whole lot invested, so it doesn't take a big return. Many times we're gaining 3 to 5 bushels, something like that, maybe a little bit more. So if we've only spent $3 to $7, hey, the return on investment is pretty good, and that's what I'm looking at.
So that early timing is one thing, but now rather than waiting until after tassel, we're seeing a lot of farmers that are getting out there somewhere pre-tassel. So in that V8 to tassel window, finding a sweet spot there to get out before that disease pressure comes in, and also to get good coverage on the ear leaf. When you think about it, at tassel, you've got several leaves in between the top of the plant and the ear leaf, and it can be a tough thing to get coverage all the way down there, especially if you're running with a gallon or two in an aerial application. So getting that treatment out yourself at a timing where you can still make it over the crop if you've got a high clearance sprayer, that could be a good option for you too, but you're going to have to use a full rate, not that low rate that Brian was talking about earlier in the season.
All right, so really there are 3 timings here. It's that early window, and we like about V5 to V7. Then you've got the pre-tassel. Then you talk after tassel. Now the after tassel timing has been the most common because we've seen tremendous yield gains when you have diseases like rust or northern corn leaf blight, or the worst one is typically gray leaf spot. We've seen this really pay in a lot of the Midwestern states like Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. For us, the early timing has actually worked better because we have lower costs and we get enough yield gain to make that pay. So I guess the big thing here is if you've never done this before, we would just encourage you to try some. Where we see the biggest response is when we have wetter years, higher yield potential, and obviously when we're going to have disease pressure move in. You just never know when that disease is going to come in, because you have to remember, with fungicides are great at preventing disease, they're lousy at curing disease. So you want to be on the upfront side. You don't want to go out there and say, oh, my leaves are loaded with disease, now's the time to spray. No, you already lost the yield, just save your money.
With a lot of those applications, you could mix other things with that treatment, especially that V5 to V7. We see a lot of things getting mixed in there, but the one where you really want to be cautious is that pre-tassel treatment. You definitely can't have any surfactants in there, and you just have to remember, your corn plants are growing so fast at that point. If you're throwing other things in there, they could cause some damage, so just be cautious.
Yeah, but I will say, every time we're spraying fungicide on our farm, we're looking at, should I have a plant growth hormone in there? Usually we do. How about foliar fertilizer? Usually we throw that in. How about insecticide? When we scout, it doesn't take very many bugs when you're already making the application to invest $2 more in insecticide. We only need a few bugs. So most of the time we're spraying, we're also throwing insecticide in. So by the time we throw 4 things in there, we are getting some pretty substantial yield gains. Now on the fungicide thing, whether it's plant health, whether it's disease control, whatever it is, I don't care as a farmer. All I care about is, am I getting yield gain? Most of the time, like I said, on our farm, we're not getting a lot of yield gain late. Last year we did because it was a wet year, but usually early, that's when on our farm we're gaining the most yield.
Well, fungicide application can certainly be beneficial in your crop. It doesn't do anything though for weed control. If you've got our weed of the week, stay tuned. We'll show you how to stop it coming up later in the show.
With the success of the Case IH Steiger Quad Track and Magnum Road Track tractors, it's no secret why Case IH is the leader of the track. So it wasn't surprising when the competition started imitating us.
Because Case IH offered the first 5-axle design to give you more power to the ground, with less berming and compaction, all to help you be more productive.
Still, we're flattered. In fact, if we weren't already red, we'd be blushing.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
Your planter is the single most important piece of equipment on your farm, because without a uniform stand, you can't reach maximum yield. That's why Harvest International set out to design a planter that takes advantage of the newest innovations in planter technology. Built tough for high speed and integrated with the latest precision enhancements, Harvest International planters ensure every seed you plant today puts more in your bin at harvest. Harvest International, planting the future.
Out here, great yield starts with great weed control. That's why I choose the Roundup Ready Xtend crop system, the system that makes the difference. Because only I know what it takes out here. Yield's what it's all for. But keeping my fields clean all season, that's what it's all about. This is my field.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
Over the last year, a lot has changed with Xtend crop herbicide labels. So today we wanted to talk just a little bit about exactly what's changed and how you can get the best success on your farm without causing damage to any of your neighbor's crops.
Well, the easy way out, Brian, is just don't spray dicamba, and that's what we hear from farmers. Oh, I'm not going to spray dicamba, but guess what? The weeds don't care. They're going to keep coming, and you may need to use the dicamba. So we want you to be really comfortable with that, and here are some guidelines so you don't have any problems.
First of all, only restricted use applicators or private pesticide applicators, commercial pesticide applicators, those are the ones who can apply these products. They have to go through a certain amount of training, and it was interesting, just a couple days ago I got a question from an agronomist, and he said, well, how about all the old dicambas, and let's say you're spraying pasture or around your yard, do you have to have special training for that? And I said, no, you just have to have your same private pesticide applicator's license, or we would often call it a restricted use license, to apply those things, and then you're fine. But you don't have to go through the special dicamba training. He said, well, why not? I said, well, the only reason why is because these new crops, the Xtend crops, in order to get labeling of the herbicides on those crops, they require the new herbicides to have this special licensing review. And actually the products got labeled for 2 years in the beginning. Well, last year it expired, so now they're getting labeled again for probably another couple of years. It's just crazy. I just don't understand how the old 2,4-D and the old dicamba, you can go spray those with just a basic license. You don't have to have all this extra training that you do for the new dicamba products that have less volatility and less drift.
Well, the other thing, Brian, is the new dicamba products have labels that seem to be continuously updated. So it may change on a week-to-week basis as new products are added on for tank mix partners and so forth. So make sure that you're checking the websites for each of these products and printing out a new label, because you have to have a new label with you when you're out in the field applying those products.
And we're talking about XtendiMax, Ingenia, and Fexapan. All right, real quick, here are some of the things that changed this year on those labels. Over-the-top application of dicamba on soybeans, 45 days after planting, that's the cutoff, 60 days after planting on cotton. Now, that's the federal label. Your state may be labeled different. For cotton, over-the-top applications are cut from 4 down to 2. Soybeans, you can still spray twice. Applications will be allowed only from 1 hour after sunrise to 2 hours before sunset. Darren, why don't you explain why that is?
This is a big thing because air inversions have been a problem, and as you get towards the evening hours, you've got that hot sun that's been beating down on the ground and heating things up. So you've got that layer of warm air down on the ground. And when you get into evening, well, what happens? That sun is not out anymore, and all of a sudden you've got this warm air that's trying to rise, and you can get an air inversion going on where if you sprayed products just before this air inversion started or as the air inversion got going, you could have product actually pick up and move. And you see
well, wait, that has nothing to do with the inversion, though. The product can always pick up and move. What the inversion does is it doesn't allow it to go 10,000 feet up in the air. It only goes to where the air temperature changes, maybe 50 or 100 feet above the ground. Well, if you have any hills at all, then all of a sudden it goes right into somebody's hillside, and then you have an issue.
So air inversions are a big deal. So if you can avoid those evening hours and early morning hours, you can really avoid most of the air inversions. That's great. But when you think about it as a farmer, when are we trying to spray dicamba? We're trying to look for those times where the air isn't moving very much. That's why we want just a tiny little bit of wind, because if we've got just a little bit of wind, we know we don't have an air inversion.
All right, just a few last things. If there are endangered species in your county, in addition to the 110-foot downwind buffer, you may have a 57-foot buffer around the other sides of your field, so make sure you're checking in your county on that. Also, there's continued emphasis on good tank clean out, which there really should have been in the beginning. And then finally, there's a lot more talk about low pH water and what that can do to increasing volatility of dicamba. So last year, there was a lot of discussion about don't use ammonium sulfate. Well, really, you're not supposed to use anything that's going to dramatically lower the pH of the water, because then you have more volatility with dicamba.
The biggest thing here, there are a lot of label restrictions that you're going to have, which is great, and they're all very protective for you as the farmer and also for the neighbor. Also use some common sense. If you've got wind blowing away from your neighbor's crop for the day of spraying and the next day, your odds of having a problem are very slim. Well, one of the reasons you may want to use dicamba on your farm is to control our weed of the week. We'll show you what it is coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our weed of the week is a common weed found in pastures and ditches. It is Western salsify.
I've also heard this one called goat's beard, and I've heard another term, well, it's that one that looks like a dandelion, but the puffball on it is even bigger. That one kind of rings true for me, because when you look at it, when it has that seed head on, yeah, it does kind of look like a dandelion, just bigger. The other thing is it looks like a grass when it's smaller. And so we see a lot of misidentification with Western salsify. The big thing, dig some up. If you find some out in grassy areas around you, it's a biennial plant. It's going to be a little tougher to kill than your average annual weed.
But fortunately, we have lots of great options. Let's start in pasture and roadside ditches. You can get by pretty well with Freelex. That's the new 2,4-D. Personally, I prefer Distinct. Many other herbicides will work as well, but those are my preferences.
When we get into crop ground, we don't normally see Western salsify. If we do see some creeping into a cornfield, we've had really good luck with Verdict. I really like the sharpen component in the Verdict. That's got some nice activity. And then post-emerge, kind of like you like Distinct. I like Status in corn. That works very well.
Yep, Darren mentioned sharpen down for corn. We love sharpen down for wheat, and then follow with Husky post-emerge.
In soybeans, we've got so many herbicide-tolerant crops: Roundup Ready, Liberty Link, Enlist, Xtend. If you're using the designated products for those crops, you just won't have any problem with Western salsify.
But we'd still suggest you start with the 3 Pre program we talk about all the time, and you should be in great shape.
That's all the time we have for this week's weed, Western salsify, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
At Estes Performance Concaves, we know how valuable your time is at harvest. That's why we designed the new XPR concave system. The XPR system is the #1 performance concave system on the market, surpassing the rest in both speed and efficiency, ensuring every last grain from your field gets into your tank. Plus, XPR concaves work for all row crops. No more changing concaves, meaning you have less downtime. Take back your bushels this harvest. Get Estes Performance Concaves in your combine today.
Tough, precise, efficient. Strip tillage with the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm. Learn more at soilwarrior.com/agphd.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
Out here, great yield starts with great weed control. That's why I choose the Roundup Ready Xtend crop system, the system that makes the difference. Because only I know what it takes out here. Yield's what it's all for. But keeping my fields clean all season, that's what it's all about. This is my field.
Your planter is the single most important piece of equipment on your farm, because without a uniform stand, you can't reach maximum yield. That's why Harvest International set out to design a planter that takes advantage of the newest innovations in planter technology. Built tough for high speed and integrated with the latest precision enhancements, Harvest International planters ensure every seed you plant today puts more in your bin at harvest. Harvest International, planting the future.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
With the success of the Case IH Steiger Quad Track and Magnum Road Track tractors, it's no secret why Case IH is the leader of the track. So it wasn't surprising when the competition started imitating us.
Because Case IH offered the first 5-axle design to give you more power to the ground, with less berming and compaction, all to help you be more productive.
Still, we're flattered. In fact, if we weren't already red, we'd be blushing.
In today's Iron Talk, we'll help you grade your planting performance from this spring. Now, are you nervous to inspect the job that your planter did in your fields this year in far less than ideal conditions? Don't let that anxiety stop you from improvements on your farm. Here's what you should look for in your fields. First, did you plant in soils that were too wet? Likely you did, and so did a majority of farmers this year. In many cases, that was the only way you were going to get things planted, since waiting a few days was just not an option. In fields where this was the case, watch for these three things. Did your seed furrow close? Is there sidewall smear? And is there compaction that will limit root growth? Now, there's not too much to do about it right now, but it may help you make decisions when you have this type of situation pop up again if you get out and see what kind of injury this caused. Next, let's evaluate how well you cleared your residue. Are you seeing hairpin stalks underneath your seed and in the furrow? Was the residue pushed far enough away from your gauge wheels? Do you need to make a change for next year in how you clear residue? Well, you have to look closely to analyze this and make the changes where needed. Third, your seeding depth and spacing. If you know your population, type it into the Ag PhD Planting Population Calculator app. Let's say you planted 30,000 corn seeds per acre in 30-inch rows. Type those numbers in and you'll see that you should have a 7-inch spacing between plants. Also, are all your plants in perfect line, or do they bounce around an inch from one side to the other? If you notice spacing is erratic, you've clearly got a problem, and it may be with how you created your seed trench to begin with. So if you notice emergence is off, or plants are coming up at different times, well, you could have an issue there as well. There are quite a few things that could be off on your planter or in your operation of the planter this spring. It's easy to blame the weather or the seed company, but that just doesn't fix anything for next year, and you'll likely notice the same problems again, and they're costing you money. I'd encourage you to be out in your fields, investigate what could have gone better with the planter, and make the changes now before they're forgotten. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's our time for today, but before we go, I want to remind you again of the Ag PhD Field Day that's coming up the last Thursday in July. It's Thursday, July 25th on our farm near Baltic, South Dakota. It is a free event. It's the largest field day in the country. 10,000 farmers we've had each of the last few years. We'd love for you to join us. Just go to agphd.com to learn more.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.